I've structured my presentation in 3 parts to be followed by a question and answer session. Should you have a quick clarification question, please do just ask at the time. Otherwise, save the conceptual and more lengthy questions till the end. I'll begin with an overview of my creative practice. As Harry mentioned, it's quite diverse. I'll continue with the inspiration for and previous installations of the Garden Grows series, and then I'll conclude the talk with a discussion about the work and the inspiration for the installation here. Okay. I am a site-specific installation artist. That question is usually, or that statement I should say, is usually followed 98% of the time by, what does that mean? Or a baffled look in the second question being, what's your medium? And of course, I don't have the 30-second elevator speech response, as the answer is not always clear to me either, as every space and every place means something different to me and is a new exploration, a new challenge, and a new process of discovery. So to prevent myself from sounding aloof, dismissive, or indecisive, I've reverted to the safety of the 4th grade. I've started to follow the Mad Lib storytelling format by answering the what type of installation do you make with the following way. For example, when I was, name a location, I made insert a subject. You get the idea. This approach seemed to bring my percentage of what does that mean down to about 40%, or maybe 60. Yet it lacked the breadth of my art practice. So thankfully tonight, I have the aid of slides with my descriptions. I intend to give you a quick overview of each of the pieces via the Mad Lib approach, without diving into too much detail as to the references or reasons for the decisions I make the work. I have a lot of slides to go through, 128 to be exact. Should you have a specific question, again, I'll be happy at the end of the discussion, at the end of the presentation, to discuss projects one-on-one in depth if you have any offline questions to ask, so that everyone else can escape and be out and about in town enjoying the music festival. So my first truly site-specific work was in Giverny, France, at the Terra Foundation. Unknown is a reflection based on walking through the city of Vernon and other small villages in Normandy, along with the multitude of cemeteries. The visual evidence of conflict was on nearly every street and could be seen from the rebuilding of the structures after each of the wars that took place on French soil. The apple trees in the courtyard also showed years of bruises, manipulations, invasions, yet managed to thrive despite all of it. The wrappings serve 2 purposes. Although the trees are indeed natural, there's nothing natural in the way they've been controlled. The white fabric creates a stark, homogenized surface that calls attention to the lumps and the bumps on the trunks of the trees and the twists and the turns of the limbs, evidence of a surrender to the human manipulation and their managed growth. The wrappings were also intended to reference a layering of bandages used to heal wounds. This title's a mouthful. Redesertification was created from 2 questions. How wise is it to populate a region that lacks a natural source of water? And the second, what life should live in this type of arid environment? The answer to the first regarding wisdom has yet to be definitively answered, but one could look at the fact that the Colorado River no longer reaches the Sea of Cortez as proof that the system is strained. The Central Arizona Project relies heavily upon water diverted from the Colorado River Basin to supply the needs of Arizona. The second question is easy to answer. The true natives create their own reservoirs. My travels in 2008 took me to the Corn Belt of America and to the Netherlands. When I travel, I always research in advance to try to get a jump start on what I would like to think about while I'm in a particular region. So when I land, I can start working immediately. My time in Peoria was a prime example of this pre-planned practice going awry. I was all ready to talk about corn, the evils of monoculture farming, industrial crops, GMOs, pesticides, ethanol, et cetera, et cetera. Instead, I immediately fell in love with the warehouse district of Peoria and its amazingly huge and often vacant brick structures that populate the shores of the Illinois River. One of the missions of the Prairie Center of the Arts, the residency that I was attending, was to create a thriving art community within Peoria, while also providing artists with the access to industrial fabrication equipment that they normally wouldn't have opportunity to use. The people that founded the residency owned a machine shop in this amazingly huge building, and they only used about 1/10 of the space in the very bottom of the building, while the rest of it remained completely abandoned. So they turned it into an artist residency space. Additionally, I was drawn to the long, flat vistas that were awaiting the next summer's corn crops. These endless landscapes were interrupted by tall, empty silos. The silos harkened back to a day when the contents determined the wealth and the fate of the small farming communities. I was likewise shocked to discover that the city of Peoria lacked a recycling program. I began to think about what the city was now stockpiling. It seemed that they were creating vast quantities of waste that could be a resource if managed differently. The resulting work was a series of suspended silos made from found materials and from materials that referenced the site. So there's one of newspaper in the foreground, tar paper behind it. This was originally a hemp rope factory, I believe before World War II. So there's one made out of jute because I wasn't able to get that much hemp cord, and then another made out of corn in the previous shot. Here's one made out of plastic bags. There were 5 Walmarts within the city borders, so there was a lot of plastic bags that I could find. A second piece that I made while I was there was Rethos, and it was made from the gathered boxes, and the rocks are made out of crocheted plastic bags that I strung together in long yarn, I guess. And then the third project I called Revolution, and it's more of a tribute to the residency itself. I wanted to highlight how the founders of the residency were bringing a vibrancy back to the overlooked and underused location. Literally, they were growing the residency out of the woodwork and from between the bricks. It's noteworthy to mention at this point that although I had always integrated recycling efforts into my work, this is the first installation that was exclusively made with the intention of bringing forth recycling as its conceptual meaning. Then I spent 3 months in the Netherlands. The work that I did there was inspired by water and water quality issues. The first looked at nitrogen fertilizer-fed blooms in the waterways, and although they're beautiful to look at, the many streams and waterways and canals filled with the water lilies, they were actually choking the streams with algae. So this is the first work. Enschede, the city that I was in, is located right on the German border and was originally a textile manufacturing city before the industry was outsourced to Asia. So my material of choice for float was hand-dyed and hand-sewn cotton. The venue it was displayed in was previously a textile factory. The shadows cast by the floating clusters were intended to look as if they were abstract molecular drawings of chemicals in the water. And the floating in the space was intended to block the free flow of human traffic through a space that we normally navigate freely. The second installation, here's a detail shot. The second installation was commissioned by the SVB And the SVB is basically the Agency of Social Services in the Netherlands. It has its own private art collection, and there's a piece embedded in these stairs that you see in the slide that says it's all about the money. And then throughout the stairs, there's sunken coins that also say it's all about the money throughout the stairs moving through the space. And perhaps it is all about the money, however disheartening that may be. But, and petroleum is the predominant source of income for the economy in the Netherlands, which isn't always a really well-known fact. And in a country where the vast majority of the land is either at or under sea level, despite how brilliant your engineers may be, the sea will eventually win, and it may no longer be just about the money. It may be evident by now that I love to travel. I have always naively said that I would go anywhere I was given a ticket to or have a free place to stay. And for the most part, that's still a true statement. To paraphrase Rick Steves, you can insulate yourself from culture with money. As an artist, enough money has never been used for insulation for me. It's not an issue. It's not an issue I have to worry about. I always try to travel as close to the ground as possible and live and move as the locals do, riding bicycles and buses, shopping in the open markets, eating the street food, whether that's wise or not. I believe there is something to be discovered, observed, and learned from every corner of our world, however near or far, similar or dissimilar the place may be. This wanderlust has very much become a part of my art practice. In 2009, I began the Garden Grows series, and I'll tell you more about this in a few minutes. But before I segue into that body of work, the initial intention of the work has expanded and led me down a few different avenues of investigation. The work took me back to the Netherlands, and then in 2011 into the belly of the beast that feeds America's addiction to consumption, China, while also allowing me the opportunity to spend some time back at home in the Bay Area looking at the aftermath of that same consumption. And most recently on a trip to South Africa to look at threatened and endangered species. I want to quickly show you one installation from my Made in China series titled Rays. The work looks at the disconnect between the building of an aspirational skyward future and the rapid removal of the foundational yet functional past. And I will talk a bit more about my experiences in China when I talk about the Garden Grows. I was in a textile region, although it was a knit region as opposed to a woven region. So all the garments that were produced in this area were knit, or there was a lot of needlepoint, oddly, as well. So everything was string-based, which was something I discovered when I arrived there. By now, you've likely noticed a few trends in my work. Okay, and that's manufactured felt that I had to have custom made, so structures on the bottom. By now, you've likely noticed a few trends in my work dealing with site specificity, addressing topics of natural resources, conservation, water quality, reuse of materials. Recycling was never more in the forefront of my work than during my residency at Recology, locally and affectionately called the Dump Residency. Amongst artists in the Bay Area, this is the most coveted of all art opportunities. And being an experienced dumpster diver myself, it was right up my alley. For 4 months, I was given unlimited access to the waste stream delivered continuously to the public disposal of San Francisco by its residents. Recology doesn't see themselves as a dump by any means, despite what this image shows. They are in a race to be the first zero-waste resource management company, and they hope to do this by 2020. Currently, they divert over 85% of what used to go directly into landfills through recycling, reusing, and composting. The Artist Residency Program is operated in conjunction with their educational program that works in turn with the Department of the Environment to bring awareness to upcycling and recycling. And this is me in my outfit with my shopping cart that I used to wheel into the public disposal every day to scavenge. The residency concludes with an exhibition of the work created during the 4 months that you're on site. And one of the rules of the residency is that 98% of the material used needs to be found in the disposal area. They do give a slight exception, but I never ran into a point where I didn't find exactly what I needed or something that was close enough to work. The only 2 exceptions were for the base of the glass piece, in which I needed to buy plywood for because it needed to be 100% structurally sound and consistent because there's a tremendous amount of weight on it. And then for this piece in the very foreground has acrylic stands, and I was using a laser cutter, and I needed to use a particular type of acrylic that didn't off-gas toxic fumes. So this was a piece called Build, and it was kind of inspired, much like the piece Raise, by my time in China and just the way things are interconnected. And it's this kind of a maze and a network of joined parts. This piece that I'm kneeling in behind is called Crevasse. And it began because I found a box of maps, road maps from the 50s and 60s. And they were of regions that have, one, expanded tremendously. A lot of them were the California coast, but they were also global areas, and most of them were also by water. So I wanted to look at how the changing landscape, or how the landscape could potentially be changed based upon the melting of glaciers. So there's looking down a map of Tokyo, a street map, one that's radically changed since that time. And these are, so it's supposed to look like polar ice when you look at it up close, and the variations within. And then this is looking back at other pieces that I made. These are what I called the Tumbleweeds. It's a remarkably windy area in the city. So there's constantly things blowing back and forth, which isn't necessarily desirable at a resource management company. But I also felt that it was kind of representative of my time there. Every 4 months, a new artist kind of rolls in, and then you're gone, and someone else takes your place. And then this is a piece called Mum, and there's actually a piece of this exhibition that was inspired or came from this piece, looking down on them. Another piece inspired from my time also in China. And then these are the acrylic pieces that I needed to look at. And this piece is called Covariance, and it's meant to be looked at as if you're looking down from above at a landscape. This experience has changed how my experience at Recology has truly changed the way I live. Americans are the most wasteful people in the world. And granted, I haven't been everywhere in the world, but if you look at just water usage alone, the average American consumes 100 gallons of, or uses 100 gallons of water a day. And you can say, well, all developed countries do that, but the average European only uses half that, and they use 50 gallons of water a day. The average person living in sub-Saharan Africa uses 3 to 5 gallons of water a day. So if you think of just the amount of resources that go into cleaning, transporting, and pumping that, providing that water at your house, we are a wasteful society. And this past summer, Recology hosted 3 artists from Haiti, and during a conversation with one of them, the artist said that America should stop sending their assistance as money via NGOs, rather just send our garbage. Our garbage is proof of our wealth as a society. The things we throw away as trash would be considered a treasure nearly anywhere else in the world. And this is the garbage from a community that already recycles, repurposes, reuses, and composts 85% of its waste. Okay, there's my little eco rant. So next, in 2012, I was given another perception and life-altering opportunity when I spent 3 months living in Johannesburg, South Africa. To be honest, I have very conflicting feelings about my time there, and I'm still processing them, and I'm not really prepared to publicly discuss them at this time. The best way I can sum up the experience is that I felt like I was in the middle of a tightrope, not knowing whether to go back, to continue forward, or to remain as still as possible, balanced in the middle. That said, if you should ever have the opportunity to go to South Africa, do. It's one of the most beautiful and diverse places I have ever traveled. And if you ever have the opportunity to view these magnificent creatures in their natural habitat, it's an experience that's unmatched. I got to watch these 2 baby leopards play with their mom for like a half hour. It was just remarkable. So I do consider myself incredibly privileged to have these opportunities, but if you have the chance, do it. The work I made during this time was called Elephant in the Room, White Elephant. Using the idiomatic expression, elephant in the room, an obvious truth that is being ignored, and a white elephant, a valuable but burdensome possession which is an honor to have, yet oppressively expensive to maintain, the work explores the interdependence of people, land, and wildlife during a time when economic stresses, greed, and financial incentives threaten to destroy the tenuous balance between them. The elephant is wet felted using South African wool. The wool is not only a replenishable resource and thus has the potential to be a continual source of income, unlike a poached elephant or rhino. It's also a resource that requires many levels of skilled labor to process and manufacture into exportable products, thus providing jobs and income. The wool also references the sleeping mats of prisoners at Robben Island that they were given as bedding. This is actually a photograph of Mandela's cell that he was in during his internment at Robben Island. The wool string on the walls is made from a similar quality wool as the fiber that the bed mats were made out of. As your gaze shifts clockwise around the room, the wall strings transition from being freely streaming down the walls before they pool onto the floor to forming on the right-hand side and the back side of the wall clusters that reference bars. So with this piece, I hope to bring forth the question that although imprisoning the elephants in zoos and on reserves may be the only way to ensure their survival, in doing so, how do we not kill their spirits? Elephants are very similar in emotional development to humans, and I know we readily incarcerate our fellow humans, but do we wish this fate on these remarkable creatures? Also note that red is the color of mourning in South Africa, it's not black. So although some people think that references blood, which you may take that reference of spilling blood, it's also one of mourning. Okay, the origins of the Garden Grows series. The Garden Grows has been an ongoing body of work since 2009, and although the beginning inspiration for the work is still a part of the work, my other experiences and travels have been incorporated into the work, and for lack of a better word, have grown to be part of it. Beginning in 2009, I assigned a project to my students to design a work that discussed or supported a cause that they cared about, to which I had a student actually respond, I quote, "I don't care about anything." Given what you've already seen about my work, one can imagine that that statement did not go over well. She then continued to explain that it wasn't that she really didn't care about anything other than herself, but that she was just too busy with school and sports and work to have time or energy to care. Nearing an apoplectic state, I tossed out, well, what about the North Pacific Gyre? Surely you care about the environment. Doesn't everyone care about the environment? Blank stare. Despite the news being overrun with coverage about the North Pacific Gyre the previous month, not one of my students in the class had ever heard of it. Grasping, I said, the garbage patch? The floating island of trash in the Pacific that's larger than Texas? To which one student said, oh yeah, I think I heard something about that. Okay, that didn't go well. But I was completely disheartened. But I tried to be empathetic and reach back to my own undergraduate days where I too may have been oblivious. I got a bit more understanding. And I recovered enough by the next class to ask them about their lives and how they managed to not have anything they cared about by the time they were in college, and how they couldn't be more aware of the world around them. The inquiry was a bit eye-opening for me. They focused mainly on their immediate environment, and at the moment, their immediate, oh, I'm supposed to be flipping through these slowly so you can see the poor turtles and understand how they consume these plastic bags that float out into our ocean due to their likeness of the jellyfish and how they become entangled, bags around their heads. So they focused on their immediate world, and at the moment it was their campus, which is a remarkably beautifully landscaped place in gorgeous Northern California. And their second world happened to be the shopping mall, which one might argue, based on the malls and where I live, it's also a beautiful place, filled with many desirable things. But they just didn't look beyond the surface. So from this seed, the garden grows germinated. The following fall, I had a solo exhibition on their campus, and I decided that I would bring their worlds together by creating an environment highlighting the waste generated from our addiction to consumption and the passive waste stream that is hidden from the consumer. The gallery was separated into 3 areas. The first, I put an old-growth forest, which was primarily made from packing materials that are not seen by the consumer. So the cardboard and plastic from behind the scenes that never makes it out to the showroom. The second room, I made a flower garden. The room was primarily made from materials the consumer does see, the pretty things, the shopping bags, the tissue paper, the discarded display materials. And I made a smaller garden that's similar to those that are all over their campus. And some of these may look a bit familiar to the outside, what you're seeing outside. The final area in the gallery, I created a bamboo forest made from shipping tubes and tissue paper. I chose bamboo as a potential alternative because it's a fast-growing, replenishable material that can be used in many of the ways that tree paper pulp can be used. Since the Garden Grows series is about consumerism, I set up rules for my own contribution to the buying cycle. The main material always needed to be found. From the materials I needed to buy, I could only spend a maximum of $5 on anything, and that would be like glue or wire. And if it involved a petroleum-based material like plastic, its original intention needed to be of single use, like packing tape or a trash bag. The next garden opportunity returned me to the Netherlands for an exhibition called Global Village. And it also expanded the content of the Garden Grows series to look further in depth at the floral industry itself. If you are at all interested in the floral industry, I would highly recommend the following 2 books. The first being The Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan, which looks specifically at the Dutch fascination with tulips and the monopoly the Dutch still hold today on the global floral market. And the second is Flower Confidential by Amy Stewart. It's a more comprehensive view of the flower trade from genetic manipulation of plants, impact on developing economies, the ecological chaos caused by fertilizers and pesticides, exploitation of labor, as well as resource depletion. And despite all of that, you will still love flowers and still covet them. It's a highly readable and engaging book. So that's a close-up. And this particular vine, I use biodegradable plastic for the leaves. And the yellow and white flowers are actually incorporated out here because the biodegradable plastics actually did biodegrade, which was quite nice, that in storage they actually did end up breaking down as they were engineered to do. So the Gerbera Daisy, everyone calls it a Gerber daisy, so I will too, is one of the most highly engineered of all the flowers, and the Dutch-owned growers control about 90% of the Gerber market, either through direct sales of the cut flowers, engineering, and the patenting of the actual plants themselves, by providing the plant tissue for other growers or for controlling the market pricing. So since this was in the Netherlands, I decided to highlight the Dutch. And then the piece where Harry saw my work in San Jose was at the 01 conference, and I'll click through these relatively quickly. That one's a tongue tire. The 01 conference is a biennial that's held in San Jose, California, that discusses the interface and the potential for engagement between art and technology. The event I participated in was called Absolute Zero, and it was really interesting to observe how people interacted with my work in a non-gallery setting. People are much more eager and willing to touch things and engage with them when they don't feel they're in a controlled environment. So it was interesting that people actually treated my little park as a park, which was both refreshing and sometimes a bit unnerving. For this also, I did really try my best to not buy anything. And the racks that you see that the vines are trellised up were actually being thrown out by Nordstrom's. So the only materials that I had to purchase for this were the platforms that the pieces were actually held on. One of the stipulations was the whole entire park needed to be installed in less than 3 hours and deinstalled in an hour. So it made for a challenging setup. Sorry about that. Now this piece, I'm not exactly sure how this even came to be, and I'm totally baffled by it. I was asked to build a garden in the window of a vacant retail space in a shopping mall that was pretty much going out of business. And since my work is kind of about wanting businesses such as that to go out of business, I was thought it rather ironic that they asked me to install my garden. And it wasn't until the work was fully installed that they realized there might have been an error in their judgment. The work was nearly censored, but I think the fear of bad publicity actually outweighed the fear that someone might actually look at the work and observe what it might be about. So the work was allowed to stay. The concession I did need to make was originally all of the boxes had branding facing forward. So you had Pottery Barn, The Gap, Target, all front and center, all of the branding. So I did make that one concession in order to keep the work in the space. This is also a rather interesting place to be installing artwork. This installation was at the Chapel of the Chimes, which is a columbarium that was designed by Julia Morgan in Oakland, California. And it's an interesting venue. Since the columbarium is the final resting spot for us beings when we were alive, and we'll never be alive again, but we will always exist in those little boxes and urns. My plastic and my flowers will also always exist, albeit in a diminished form after they break down over time, and they will always be here. So it was just an odd place to have the opportunity to exhibit work. Okay, on to China. Earlier in the talk, I showed one work from my trip to China. I chose specifically to go to the Yunnan province because Kunming is the center of the floral industry for Asia, much like the Netherlands is the center of the European and North American flower trade. I don't often believe what I'm told about other places in the American media. And my impressions of China up until going there were fully formed by mediated images. So I wanted to experience firsthand what being in China was like. And these images are all from the flower market. And this is about 3 a.m. in the morning. And this is a very different flower market than the Dutch flower markets, if you've ever had the chance to see the flower auctions in action. Two of the works that came out of my investigation are actually part of the Made in China series, but they're close enough related to the Garden Grows series to include for this purpose. Unfortunately, the exhibition that these were part of, I'm missing the slide that tells you the name of the show, which did not translate well. I can't even remember. It was such a convoluted name by the time it was translated. Okay, side note. Unfortunately, this exhibition was in the first month of my stay, so the works are not as reflective of my experiences as I would have liked them to have been, or of the scale that I would have chosen had I had additional time. The first piece is called Rain, which you see hanging there. And these flowers are also in one of the urns here at the Telfair. The second piece is a performance called Wallflower, which is more reflective of how I felt while I was there. I felt watched and noticed, a point of curiosity, but yet I was unable to engage verbally. And usually when I'm on a residency, I'm the watcher. I'm the person that's observing quietly from the corner. I'm looking for things that I find different, but yet in this case, I was different. And what I really wanted to be was a wallflower that nobody noticed so I could observe what was around me. So I did this performance about just trying to integrate myself into the wallpaper by covering myself as well with flowers. So that no one would really notice me. The next installation of the Garden Grows series was called Cultivate, and it was part of the Tony 2012 exhibition at the Everson Museum in Syracuse. Tony stands for The Other New York. I think anyone outside New York as an artist can feel as if they're an other. And for this piece, the Everson was I.M. Pei's first art museum. In the design, he allowed for 3 flower boxes to be incorporated in areas that overlooked atriums. It didn't take long for the museum to realize an error had been made, and that having live growing plants and the critters that they attract in a climate-controlled museum was probably not the best idea when they have a valuable art collection. So consequently, the planters were emptied and filled with gravel until I repopulated them with my inorganic plants from the Garden Grows series. And then the mums from Recology overlooked the library. Oops. I'm missing a page. Oh no. I might have to go freeform. The Garden Grows Only Here is from my stay in South Africa. And it was also inspired by the plant life, and I have been increasingly interested in the impact of climate change on vulnerable regions and endangered species. Table Mountain, which you see here in the photo, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Many people believe the reason for the designation is the uniqueness of the landscape. In actuality, the designation is for the Cape Floral Kingdom region. It's a small region in South Africa that contains nearly 7,000 endemic plant species, while only occupying 0.04% of the land. And by endemic, that means that these 7,000 plants only grow in South Africa, in this one tiny little part of land. So it's a really vulnerable place. It's one of the most diverse ecosystems on the planet. So I selected 4 of the fynbos species, fynbos being small leaf, that are classified either as endangered or threatened. The Roidiza, and I'm going to bash these next 2 names. In the foreground is the Bibenia, and in the background is a yellow arum. And then this is a king Protea. And the king Protea can actually grow to be about 12 inches in diameter. So they're really fascinating when you see an old Protea. The arrangement of the flowers, and I'll go back slides here. The arrangement of the flowers references South Africa's political past, the current practice of monoculture agriculture. The plants have been unnaturally separated from one another and placed in a configuration that references the layout of the 4-roomed matchbox houses that were constructed in the townships during the apartheid era. And now we're at the Jebsen. And I'm kind of running short on time, so I'll move through this really quickly, and then we'll move on to the question and answer session. Last May, I was invited by the Telfair Museum to create an installation of the garden works for the public spaces of the Jebsen. I immediately looked at the remarkable images of the space and knew I needed to visit Savannah. The space was even more stunning than I could have ever imagined, as was the city itself. There were a few features in the space that I found incredibly inspiring. The first was the light and the shadows in the atrium and the way the space is transformed throughout the day based on the position of the sun and the intensity of the sun. The second was the way the atrium felt as if it was actually part of the square and that there's no visual boundary between the inside of the space and the outside of the square. There seemed to be an opportunity to further blur that boundary between the institutional space and the public park. The windows openings that you can see here by the cafe just seemed to be a natural place for the gardens to appear because it seems everywhere you look in Savannah, something is growing. If there's a bit of soil, there's life sprouting out of it. The third area that I wanted to address was the bridge. Oops, sorry, I should be looking at what I'm pushing. The bridge, because it seemed like a natural trellis, and plants seem to naturally grow across trellises. And it also worked as a transitional space to go up to the glass area, and then up to the 3rd floor. So then, we can see my work. The tree branch, I wanted to create the illusion of the oak actually growing through the wall and into the space. One question that's always asked is, what's this made out of? It's newspaper over chicken wire, over aluminum conduit, and the leaves are all made out of San Francisco Chronicle delivery bags. When it's raining, they put our papers in plastic bags. So that's what this particular piece is made out of. And there's and to bring my heart back to South Africa, the newspaper I used for this particular piece was from the day that Mandela died. And this is actually what I was hoping to achieve with this piece, was from the outside it actually does look like a continuation of the tree, more so than even on the inside. And more so even at night, because you get the shadows of the tree actually on the building. And then you all passed under the vine, but you can get a really nice close-up look of it from the conference room if you walk on the second floor into the conference room area. And this is made from garbage bags from South Africa, France, and Spain. The dark lavender, the dark purples from Spain. The rest of the world has very beautiful garbage bags. I don't know why we're stuck with black. And then you'll notice that some of these plants look quite familiar. I'm calling them my heritage plants or my heirlooms because they keep popping up over and over again, just in different configurations. There's a close-up. My use of the urns was to connect the collection at the Academy to the contemporary space here at the Jepson. Little did I know that was going to be slightly harder than we originally planned to find urns. Since they're everywhere in Savannah, I thought they would be readily available. And what's kind of ironic is although these look old, they're actually fiberglass. And this is the last minute piece that went in that I mentioned earlier. I was talking to one of the installers and I said, I have one more piece and we have one more day. And so we found this location and it actually works quite well given the color and the glass behind it. And then the piece here at the top of the stairs is called Mum in Tweet. And it works with the idea of the mum flower and kind of a play on the word of mumming something or silencing it. The mum in Eastern countries is often a flower of mourning, whereas in America it's often seen as kind of a goofy or happy plant. The idea of the death of the book and the quieting of the book, but yet with the digitization of all of the books, we now have actually more access to more information than we've ever had in our entire life, and we can all see volumes that you would never have had the opportunity to see prior to digitizing them. And the tweets are, the birds, are kind of my comment on our digital communication and how, although we have the knowledge and the wealth that these books have to offer, we're really only interested in the 140 character statement that summarizes it. So that's kind of what's going on with this particular piece. Okay, and my work is even more diverse than what you saw this evening, so if you want to see more of it, this is my website. If you have questions, my email. And this is kind of a preview of my website. I know there are some fiber artists in the room, so you might be drawn to some of the work that I've done, other work I've done in wool.